talking about 70s baseball earlier. It looks alive when you watch that. New book is out now, Forgotten Miracle, the story of the 1973 New York Mets. The author, Mark Rosenman, joins us now here in the studio. Mark, it's great to have you here on the show.
Great to be here, bro.
This is one of my favorite teams. I grew up in New York, and this team, the city fell in love with because they weren't a great team, but they did great things. Just to let people know, this team won 82 games, beat the Big Red Machine in 5, lost in 7 to a 2-time World Series defending champion. So just tell me, what fascinated you about this club?
Everything. First of all, that's my childhood. You know, the clip you just showed, I was actually in the stands that day. And I actually had started this book like 3 years ago, and then I put it on the shelf. And then, you know, I run this website called KINER'S, and we have a Facebook group, and people were counting last year's Mets out, saying, you know, they're 11 games under 500. I said, they're 4 games out. You know, they're not out of it. So then, for some reason, I went back to this book at that point. And it was so strange that the 2 seasons, it was almost like the Bizarro world, the Superman, 2, you know, different planes, but they were on the same course. So the 73 Mets had You Gotta Believe. Last year's Mets had OMG. That 73 team, when they had a team meeting with Tug McGraw and, you know, the You Gotta Believe, all of a sudden they had belief in themselves. The game where Jorge Lopez threw his glove in the stands, the Mets had a team meeting, and they went on an unbelievable run. And then, and it was going like in sequence. And then, which totally blew my mind, the fact that the last year's Mets had Bud Harrelson's number, Jerry Grody's number, and Willie Mays' number on their shoulder. And both teams needed, the day after the season ended, to play a doubleheader and needing 1 game to get into the playoffs.
Oh, wow.
Chicago, and this year was Atlanta.
Yeah, I mean, that year, I mean, Tom Seaver, just to go, 290 innings of a 2.08 ERA. So he's a superstar, having what we now call an 11-win season. But Willie Mays in his last year, Rusty Staub is super clutch. You have a good, I didn't realize this, Willie Mays, final year, you have a good story about Willie playing golf or not playing golf with Joe Namath, 2 of the huge icons. Tell us about that.
There's a couple of Willie Mays stories. First of all, during spring training, this was the first, because the Mets had acquired him midseason the year before. This was the first time he was not training in Arizona with the Giants. He got homesick. He left, didn't tell the team. The Mets, 3 days, had no idea where he was. They ended up sending the police to his house to find out if everything was okay. There was just a lot of, you know, Willie Mays wasn't sure if he was going to retire during the season multiple times, wouldn't let the Mets know. But during the offseason, there was this huge golf tournament in Puerto Rico. And it was, the theme was the city's superstars would be teaming up with each other and golfing. He was supposed to golf with Joe Namath. Comes at tea time, and Joe Namath's not there. Joe Namath shows up 15 minutes late. Willie says, I'm not golfing with him. He disrespected me. I'm not golfing with him. And Mays ends up golfing with, I think it was Steve Blass, and Joe ends up golfing with some nondescript wide receiver from the 49ers. But he was adamant that he was not, that he felt so disrespected by
Snubbed by Joe Willie.
Yeah.
This is last year. Well, to get to the Mets won 10 of 13, the last 13, to win on the last day of the season. I even just looked this up. Rusty Staub hit 393 in that stretch. In that final series with the Cubs, Rusty Staub 8 for 14. Like, Staub is this lost figure, not quite a Hall of Famer, but he's beloved by several fan bases. Tell us about Rusty.
Yeah, on top of it, if you think, well, also in spring training, Rusty Staub was fined, I believe it was $100 for coming in 5 pounds overweight.
I think it was 500. I just read that.
500.
Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah.
Right.
So, which is
for
crazy
2 pounds.
if you think about nowadays. Can you imagine that? You got Rafael Devers who won't even play a position. Imagine getting fined for that. But Rusty, had he not injured his shoulder, you know, the Mets might have won against, you know, the A's.
Yeah.
So, but Rusty was, you know, he was a team leader. He came in. You know, the guys they traded for him, Kenny Singleton, Tim Foley, and Mike Jorgensen at the time, that was a big trade for them. But it paid off for the Mets because they did make the World Series.
Against the Reds. Again, they beat the Big Red Machine, and it was the Big Red Machine then. Tell me about this is the iconic thing, too. It's the fight with Pete Rose, or Pete Rose attacking Bud Harrelson. What happened there?
So the day before, Bud Harrelson had said something about the Reds, about the Mets pitching staff. You know, the Big Red Machine's not, you know, when they have to face our pitching, they won't be that, you know, mean. And that was bulletin board
Doesn't
fire.
sound too inflammatory, even the way you're mentioning it now, right?
But if you take a look, if you take a look at Perez and Morgan and Rose, those are kind of fighting words, and they put that on the bulletin board as fuel. And you know, and Buddy was the person that said it. So the first opportunity that Pete had to take him out, he did. And Harrelson, you know, didn't back down. And in fact, the next day he had like this Superman shirt underneath his uniform. All hell broke out. I remember I was at that game as well. The Mets had to send out Willie Mays out to the outfield, along with, I believe it was Berra, to calm the fans down because they were throwing stuff at Pete Rose.
Out? Oh, really? Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Look, it's crazy. They're having a fist fight out on the field.
Yeah, and
playoff game. National TV.
Right. And Pedro Bourbon takes a bite out of Buzz Capra's hat. It's like,
oh, okay. I missed that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Crazy stuff. Again, with Johnny Bench holding it back.
Yeah.
Again, the game was not boring back then, by the way.
No,
point that out. Yeah, not vanilla. Game 2 of the World Series. That's when Willie Mays fell down, right? There was also, was that the Andrews error? Mike Andrews made 2 errors, and what Charlie Finley tried to fire him?
Yeah.
Right? What happened there?
And the A's rallied around him. It was a big focal point for the A's. I mean, Charlie Finley did a lot of things that pissed off the players. This one in particular, obviously Andrews was the GOAT in this game. He made the 2 errors, which gave the Mets that win, and Finley will try to cut him and try to make Andrews sign something that he was injured. And, Andrews did it under duress. The players found out about it. They kind of rallied around it. And, he became a rallying point for the A's.
Yeah, the other iconic figure, again, in this is Tug McGraw. This is You Gotta Believe, right? So where does You Gotta Believe come from? I think you mentioned it was in a team meeting?
So it was prior to a team meeting. So Gil Hodges had a friend that had stopped by the ballpark a lot. He was an insurance salesman, but back in the day, the salesman back in the 70s also took the self-help classes, and he was kind of a guru. And what we now probably call a mental coach.
Right.
So Tug was struggling that season. He really was having an awful year. And the guy stopped by the ballpark, and Tug had mentioned, he said, let's go grab lunch.
Yeah.
And then the guy kept on saying, you have to have belief in yourself. You have to have belief. So the Mets have a team meeting. The owner, M. Donald Grant is in there, the GM, and he's saying, guys, we're not out of this. You have to have belief in yourself. And Tug had just come from this lunch, and every 2 seconds he kept on saying, yeah, you got to believe. You got to believe. And, M. Donald Grant thought he was mocking him. Eddie Krampel had to smooth that over, but it became the rallying cry for that season.
Tug wasn't kidding.
No,
Tug believed. Tug had belief.
He came from that lunch, and I'm sure there were a couple of cocktails at that lunch as well. But that was the story behind it.
I remember, again, you were a kid. I was a kid watching that. But seeing Tug McGraw come up, pounding his glove, being fired up. Again, I think he's a good Hall of Fame candidate, Tug McGraw, for this year. Not as great as he pitched 118 innings that year down the stretch.
Yeah. I mean, he had turned that season. From that point on, he was untouchable. The beginning of the season, he was awful. He really was. He had struggled tremendously, and his Philly legacy is worthy as well.
Oh, no question. Forgotten miracle story of the 1973 New York Mets. Mark, thanks for coming in. Appreciate that.